A gunshot on Chicago's South Side changed two lives forever. Detective Jerome Washington died. His partner, Frank Morrison, lived. 20 years later, as Frank tried to remember that night, he would face a horrifying truth. The person who shot Jerome wasn't a stranger at all. And that revelation would expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the Chicago Police Department. Don't forget to leave your city and location in the comments below. Remember, every comment is a voice. Every voice is a change. What about you? Have you ever encountered an event or situation like this? Leave a comment. We'd love to hear your story. Chicago, Illinois, March 15, 2004. Rain poured down on the cracked pavement of 87th and Ashland. Two police cruisers sat outside an abandoned warehouse, their red and blue lights painting the darkness in urgent colors. Detective Jerome Washington, 34 years old, African American, 6 years on the force. His partner, Detective Frank Morrison, 42 years old, white, 15 years of experience. They had been partners for 3 years. More than that, they had been friends. The call had come in at 11:47 p.m. Shots fired. Officer needs assistance. No other details. Just an address and a plea for help. What happened next would haunt Frank Morrison for 20 years. Jerome took point as they approached the warehouse. Frank covered his standard procedure. They had done this hundreds of times before. But this time was different. This time, someone was waiting for them. Frank Morrison, now 62, sat in his kitchen staring at his coffee. Retirement hadn't been kind to him. His wife Margaret had passed away 6 months ago. His son lived in California and rarely called. The only company he had were his memories, and most of those he tried to forget. But today was different. Today was the anniversary, March 15th, the day Jerome died. Frank had spent 20 years trying to piece together what happened in that warehouse. The official report said they had walked into a drug deal gone wrong. Jerome was shot by a suspect who escaped in the confusion. Frank had been knocked unconscious by falling debris when shots were fired. When backup arrived, Jerome was dead and Frank was bleeding from a head wound. Case closed. Hero's funeral. Move on. But Frank knew something wasn't right. The pieces never fit. The timeline didn't make sense, and there were gaps in his memory that troubled him more each year. What Frank didn't know was that his memory gaps weren't caused by the head injury. They were caused by something much more sinister. The doorbell rang at exactly 2:15 p.m. Frank wasn't expecting anyone. These days, no one visited except the mailman and the kid who delivered groceries. He opened the door to find a young black man, maybe 25 years old, standing on his porch. The man had Jerome's eyes, Jerome's jawline, Jerome's presence. Detective Morrison? Frank's heart stopped. Who's asking? My name is Marcus Washington. Jerome Washington was my father. The words hit Frank like a physical blow. Jerome's son. The boy had been 5 when Jerome died. Frank remembered him at the funeral, a small child who didn't understand why daddy wasn't coming home. Marcus? Frank whispered. Come in, please. Marcus stepped inside, carrying a manila envelope. His movements were careful, controlled, like a man who had spent years preparing for this moment. Detective Morrison. Frank, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Frank nodded, unable to speak. What really happened the night my father died? What Frank didn't know was that Marcus had spent 5 years investigating his father's death, and what he had discovered would change everything. Marcus opened the envelope and spread photographs across Frank's coffee table. Crime scene photos, police reports, witness statements, documents Frank had never seen before. The official story doesn't add up, Marcus said. I've been digging into this for years. There was no drug deal. There were no suspects. The warehouse was empty except for you and my father. Frank stared at the photos. Seeing Jerome's body again after 20 years brought back a flood of memories, but also questions he had buried. Marcus, I was unconscious. I don't remember everything. That's what you've been told. But look at this. Marcus pointed to a crime scene photo. Your head wound. It's perfectly round, like you were hit with something specific. Not debris from an explosion or falling. Frank leaned closer. He had never seen this photo before. The wound on his head was indeed round, with clean edges. Someone hit you with a blunt object, Marcus continued. Someone who wanted you unconscious, but alive. The question is, why? Marcus pulled out another document. I also found this. A witness statement that was never included in the official report. Frank read the statement. Mrs. Rosa Martinez, who lived across from the warehouse, had seen 3 police cars arrive. Not 2. 3. And she had seen 4 officers enter the building. Not 2. 4. Where did you get this? Mrs. Martinez gave it to an internal affairs investigator 3 weeks after the incident, but it was buried. Hidden. Someone didn't want this information public. What Marcus showed him next would reveal the horrifying truth about that night. And it would name the people responsible for Jerome's murder. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Frank a video. It was grainy. Old security footage from a building across the street from the warehouse. I tracked down every piece of surveillance from that night. This camera was overlooked by the investigation. Frank watched as 3 police cars pulled up to the warehouse. He could see himself and Jerome getting out of the first car, but then 2 more officers emerged from the second car, and from the third car came someone Frank recognized immediately, Sergeant Danny O'Malley, Frank's old supervisor. O'Malley, Frank whispered. You recognize him? He was our sergeant, but he wasn't supposed to be there that night. He was off duty. Marcus paused the video. Keep watching. The footage showed all 5 officers entering the warehouse. Frank and Jerome first, then the other 3. 11 minutes later, Frank emerged unconscious, carried by 2 officers. O'Malley came out alone. Jerome never came out alive. Frank, Marcus said quietly, I think my father was murdered by other cops. Frank felt the room spinning. 20 years of guilt, 20 years of wondering what he could have done differently, and now this. Jerome hadn't died in a random shooting. He had been executed, but why Marcus had really come to Frank wasn't just for answers. It was because he had discovered something that would put both their lives in danger. There's more, Marcus said. After my father's death, 5 black officers left the Chicago PD within 2 years. 3 transferred to other departments. 1 retired early, and one died in a suspicious car accident. Frank's blood ran cold. What are you saying? I'm saying there was a systematic campaign to remove black officers from certain units. My father wasn't the first victim. He was just the most visible. Marcus showed Frank newspaper clippings, personnel files, incident reports. A pattern emerged of black officers being transferred, demoted, or forced out after complaints of racism went nowhere. O'Malley wasn't acting alone. There was a network. White officers who saw black cops as a threat to their way of doing business. Frank remembered the conversations he had ignored, the jokes that weren't funny, the comments about Jerome that made him uncomfortable. He had told himself it was just locker room talk, but it was more than that. Frank, I need to ask you something difficult. Did you know? Did I know what? Did you know they were planning to hurt my father? Frank looked into Marcus's eyes, Jerome's eyes, and felt 20 years of buried truth clawing its way to the surface. No, he said firmly, but I should have seen the signs. I should have protected him. You couldn't protect him because you were never meant to survive that night, either. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. What Marcus revealed next would explain why Frank had lived when Jerome died, and it would set in motion a plan for justice that was 20 years in the making. You lived because O'Malley needed a witness, Marcus explained, someone to corroborate the official story, but they couldn't let you remember what really happened. Frank touched the scar on his head. The head injury wasn't meant to kill you. It was meant to cause memory loss, selective amnesia. You remember arriving at the warehouse, but not what happened inside. Fragments of memory began returning to Frank. Voices arguing. Jerome saying, this isn't right. A struggle. The sound of metal against skull. Then darkness. I remember, Frank whispered. Jerome figured something out. He knew it was a setup. What kind of setup? Frank closed his eyes, forcing himself to remember. There was supposed to be drugs in the warehouse. A big bust. But when we got there, it was empty. Jerome said we were being played. The memory came flooding back. Jerome had drawn his weapon not because of external threats, but because he realized they were in danger from their own colleagues. He tried to warn me, Frank said, tears streaming down his face. Jerome tried to protect me, and I couldn't protect him. Marcus placed a hand on Frank's shoulder. You couldn't protect him then, but you can help me get justice now. What do you want from me? Frank asked. I want you to remember everything. I want you to testify, and I want you to help me prove that O'Malley and his crew murdered my father. Frank looked at the evidence spread across his table. 20 years of carefully hidden truth. Marcus, these people are still in positions of power. O'Malley is a captain now. This could be dangerous, I know. But I also know something else. You're not the only survivor. Marcus pulled out another file. Officer Patricia Williams. She was Jerome's first partner before you. She left the force in 2003, 1 year before my father died. She's been waiting 20 years to tell her story. Frank recognized the name. Patricia Williams had been a rising star in the department until she suddenly transferred to a desk job, and then left entirely. She's agreed to testify if you will, but it has to be both of you. One person can be discredited. Two people corroborating each other. That's harder to dismiss. Frank thought about Jerome, about their friendship, about the promise he had made at Jerome's funeral to always look out for his family. What do we need to do? Marcus smiled, the same smile Frank remembered from Jerome. We're going to do what my father would have wanted. We're going to clean house. 2 weeks later, Captain Danny O'Malley sat in an FBI conference room, his hands cuffed to the table. Across from him sat Agent Sarah Martinez, Frank Morrison, Patricia Williams, and Marcus Washington. Captain O'Malley, Agent Martinez began, "You're being charged with the murder of Detective Jerome Washington and conspiracy to commit civil rights violations." O'Malley's face was stone. "I don't know what you're talking about." Frank leaned forward. "Danny, I remember everything now. The warehouse, the setup, what you did to Jerome. You were unconscious, Frank. Head injury. You don't know what you think you remember." Patricia Williams spoke up. "I know what Jerome told me before. He died. He said you threatened him, said black officers needed to know their place." O'Malley's composure cracked slightly. "You have no proof." Marcus placed a digital recorder on the table. "Actually, we do." The device played a conversation recorded just days earlier. O'Malley's voice was clear. Jerome Washington got what was coming to him. Him and any other black cop who thinks they can change how we do business. O'Malley had been lured into the confession by an undercover FBI agent posing as a potential ally. Danny O'Malley, Agent Martinez said, "You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and violation of civil rights under color of law." 6 months later, Frank Morrison stood at Jerome Washington's grave. The headstone now bore a new inscription: "Detective Jerome Washington, hero, father, champion of justice." Marcus stood beside him, wearing his father's badge. He had joined the Chicago Police Department as part of a new initiative to reform the force from within. "He would be proud of you," Frank said. "He would be proud of both of us. It took 20 years, but we kept our promise." Frank nodded. The guilt he had carried for 2 decades wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something else. Purpose, determination, a commitment to ensure that Jerome's death meant something. Danny O'Malley and 4 other officers were serving life sentences. The Chicago PD had undergone massive reforms. A new generation of officers, led by people like Marcus, was changing the culture from within. "Frank," Marcus said, "I want you to know something. My father talked about you all the time when I was a kid. He said you were more than his partner. You were his brother." Frank felt tears welling up. "He was mine too." "Brothers protect each other," Marcus continued. "That night, you couldn't protect him. But these past months, you helped me get justice for him. I think that's what he would have wanted." As they walked away from the cemetery, Frank felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years. Peace. Jerome Washington was finally resting in peace, and his killers were finally paying for their crimes. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes it takes 20 years, but the truth always finds a way to surface. And when it does, those who stand for what's right will always triumph over those who hide behind badges and power. Don't forget to leave your city and location in the comments below. Remember, every comment is a voice. Every voice is a change. What about you? Have you ever encountered an event or situation like this? Leave a comment. We'd love to hear your story.